Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to Higher Ed Revolution number 1. This is Higher Ed Revolution episode 1, and we're going to be having a fun-filled episode today, where Rob's going to be talking, giving a small presentation, and also giving a little bit of an interview that he's going to be doing with Dougald Hine. We're going to be talking to Jesse Daniël on something that he's busy with, and also a special article that he wrote this week for Higher Ed Revolution. And, of course, I'm going to be talking about Higher Ed Revolution and what we've been doing there as well. Well, this is our inaugural episode. We've been doing previous things, and now we're doing this. Welcome. Rob, how are you doing?
Good. Good fun week. I'm in the midst of moving from right where I am now to about 2 miles away in a different into a nice 3-bedroom condominium in a nice little development, and I'm excited for that. Spring is here, and been spending a bunch of time reading about student loan debt and also indentured servitude in preparation for the section, which is almost completed for the new book slash series of articles that I'm working on about student loan debt and how to avoid it, and how to get an education without paying a tremendous amount of money for it. And what I've been doing is reaching out to people and just asking them about how they're dealing with all the changes that are happening in higher ed. So it's been a fun week.
And you'll be talking to somebody about that next week as well in an interview.
Yeah, next week, this week, we're starting on doing a series of interviews. One, today's, which we'll be showing you, is with Dougald Hine, who has done a bunch of different work in kind of very much along the line of what Oplerno has done. He's a British author and editor and social entrepreneur, and he co-founded the School of Everything, which was a way to get faculty teaching students, generally for free or as a social service, and the Dark Mountain Project, of which he was director at large. And in 2011, he was named one of Britain's top 50 radicals, and his work in education is pretty substantial. He's taught at a bunch of different colleges and universities, and now he is living in Sweden. And we're going to have an interview with him. Next week, the following week, I've set up an interview with Syrian Johansson, who's a freelance journalist, editor, and copywriter. She just published a book which is called Solving the Student Loan Crisis, Dreams, Diplomas, and a Lifetime of Debt. It's along the line of sort of what's called a scholarly personal narrative, where she tells her own story about how she got involved in higher education and the dreams that she had with that, and then became quite indebted through the process. She's now founder and executive director of All Education Matters, a not-for-profit that advocates on behalf of student loan debtors to get that debt forgiven or remediated. And in 2012, she's a recipient of a journalism grant from the Economic Hardship and Reporting Project. I'll be interviewing her next week. If you have questions, please send them to me. There's also going to be a link on the screen to her book, and you can purchase that book on Amazon and have it sent to you and read it. And then I'll probably tweet out when we're having the interview, and there'll be a small like 8-minute section, but we're also going to publish the longer version, because there's a lot that Syrian and I are going to talk about in terms of solving the student loan debt crisis. So I'm going to be, my sort of section of the higher ed rev is going to be interviews and discussing with people on various aspects of student loan debt for the next month or two, and then we'll be pushing some other. I'll be coming up with some other topics later on. So I'm looking forward to it.
And Jesse, for you, what's your it's going to be in the new format of Higher Ed Revolution?
Well, I'm definitely sympathetic to what Robert is doing. I'm also a recent graduate now twice, and I'm looking forward to not only working with him on where we can provide some support for solutions into how students can alleviate or completely avoid debt, but also just to learn from him, and perhaps we can even learn a little bit from each other. Maybe I could perhaps be a source of an interview at some point. So I'm
Yep.
sympathetic to that. Not only that, I would also love to someday be considered for that list of radicals. Maybe the U.S. has one as well, or we can generate one and support its creation. So that being said, I've sort of been brought on within a capacity for helping to sort of design our engagement approach. Right now, that involves how our website is interfacing with the user, whether that user is a student, whether that user is a current or potential faculty member, or whether that user is a community or an organization. We want everyone to sort of be involved in that discussion. So that's my immediate task. I've really been enjoying the learning process of website design. It's something that's new to me, but I consider myself a lifelong student, as we all should. So I'm sort of I'm excitedly approaching that task. So with respect to pretty much all aspects of the website, my thought is that it should engage the user in a way that allows them to contribute to what our open learning organization is, and how it evolves into something that is accessible and relevant for everyone, whether, like I said, whether you're a teacher, student, or an organization. So I'm busy sort of building out the forums for inquiry. I'm busy building out, what our verbiage looks like, how we're inspiring that, because we are here to support that growth as much as we are here to sort of sit back and watch the magic happen, which is what most facilitators say is important for learning. So yeah, I mean, in terms of what I bring to the table, I haven't really introduced myself all that much. I majored first in finance, and I went and worked at a bank to my own sort of frustration after about 3 years. After that, I began to really embrace the world around me and explore it through a lot of travel. I went to South America, worked with a lot of local organizations that were doing amazing things, such as reforestation, such as urban design, and then I brought that sort of community learning component back with me to the States, where I went back to New York for a second time and started pursuing another degree, which was this time in international affairs. I kind of just wanted to be engaged with the world around me, and that seemed like a legitimate pursuit. It was at a school called the New School, a pretty progressive learning institution that John Dewey was involved in starting back in the 19-teens, as he left Columbia, which was a little bit American-centric at the time of the First World War. That inspired me. All of that inspired me. The community there was great, but while I was there, I had the opportunity to take some pretty awesome social entrepreneurship courses, which inspired me to think about a project that began to look at the value of alumni and how they could better fold in their contribution to the school community. So I was able to ideate on that. I worked with a couple of awesome startups, one which focused on the purpose and work called Imperative. I was a fellow there. I was able to go overseas to Kosovo and work with high school students as they designed social impact projects in a region that is rife with conflict but also ripe with opportunity. That was incredibly inspiring. These are kids that, these are kids that were doing things that I would have loved to have the opportunity to do at that age. And I feel like, to sort of segue all of this back into Oplerno, I feel like that's in a lot of ways what we seek to do, which is to engage those critical points of learning, right? And engage the people from the ground up, right? To contribute to all of these challenges, and their potential solutions, to give them the tools, the low cost, the accessibility, all of the resources that are necessary to pursue meaningful action. So that brings me to what my role is, which is engagement director. And as much as I would love to, I look forward to working with teachers, and as much as I look forward to working with community members, I very much look forward to working with students. I look forward to engaging them on things like Robert has, like I mentioned, that he wants to work with and overcome the debt slavery that plagues our society, and of which I am also, I'm in that cohort, right? So I greatly sympathize with it, and I know there's a lot of individual students, current, potential, alumni that of all socioeconomic communities or parts of that spectrum, that seek a better way forward, and we want to engage all of those people to bring their voice out, and in doing so, build out the content and build out the learning communities that are possible if we're all given an equal voice in them. So that kind of speaks to a little bit about what I was writing, or what I was inspired to write on for my first post with the Higher Education Revolution publication on Medium, which is Learning Anywhere, and why I believe it's the near future in higher education. I kind of write from this perspective of imagine yourself these days at the age of 18 and what that looks like regardless of your socioeconomic position, because I know the challenges can be great for some at the lower tiers of that. But with simple access to the internet, right, and with the right inspired disposition or perspective on what learning means for anyone, I feel like we can very quickly change the discussion on how do we find the next $1 trillion of funding for the next generation of higher ed learners, and how do we inspire them to sort of create their learning for themselves, right? Because then more naturally the discussion grows between themselves, between the other students in their generation, their teachers, who we are showing can come from anywhere across the globe, which is incredibly beautiful, and all of the public and private organizations and communities that are growing to create unique learning opportunities for students outside of walls. And that's it, right? Education institutions can have a role in this. They can be a space for learning. They have created a lot of we'll say, legacy edifices, which is okay, which is great, but I don't think it's the only way in which students can or need to learn. And I feel like there's a much more sustainable, symbiotic, collaborative, meaningful relationship that we can generate if learning is understood as being anywhere at any time for any reason and for anyone.
Yeah, we've got to get rid of the edifice complex and look at other ways to, configure higher ed and configure people's lives and learning. Right. And that's what we're doing. That's what we're doing at Oplerno. But what higher ed revolution is going to be concentrating on is really these kinds of news stories and new narratives of people creating new types of education, and it's also creating new kinds of lives and new ways of getting at work and of training for your work, and all that's incredible, and it helps us at Oplerno because we want to we're not calling this team meeting 101 because this isn't just about, Oplerno's story to try to move forward. What we want to do is we want to be connecting with people who are who have really interesting configurations, really interesting concepts of how they're handling their learning in their lives, and avoid the pitfalls of debt, which is being used to control individuals, communities, and societies all over the planet, as people end up having to pay loads of interest rather than invest in their communities and create more capital. So yeah, Jesse, it's funny, we've been having so many meetings online that I forgot that this was your first, meeting that all three of us were together, talking publicly about this. So yeah, we're really happy to have you on board and are excited, to have you up in Maine, and that's great.
Yeah, the one thing I would add to that, I second the thanks or the appreciation for the opportunity to be a part of this. I think it's very positive and strong and potent. But I encourage anybody watching this to engage with me in any way, in any place, for any reason. I want to hear from you. Support and discussion are the valuable aspects of progress, and it begins there. So reach out to me via email, on Medium. You can find me on Twitter. Reach out, connect. Let's get the party started.
Now, you're not in your usual spot, Daniel.
This is true. Usually I'm behind me. You can see lots of books and computers and everything. Today I am in a very nice place. It is in Belgium. I am in Ghent. And this is the Cathedral of Ghent, which you can just see outside my window, which is, of course, a great view and a great place to be doing the Higher Ed Revolution first episode.
So tell us a little bit about what you've been up to in terms of the Medium Higher Ed Rev, and then some other things.
Yeah. Well, with Medium Higher Ed Revolution, say our publication that goes with podcast is going very well. We have 2,500 subscribers. I think we have over 100 writers. We're getting a steady stream of posts every week. We had a very interesting post that Jesse just described to you, which is currently our top post. We're discussing all kinds of things. There are posts on getting started with podcasts, how to improve your memory for virtual items in AR and VR, so augmented reality and virtual reality, rediscovering wonder, new technologies you can use to teach with how to study for certain aspects, whether you're studying, in this case, how to study for biology. There's also some Dr. Seuss things and some general items, also of interesting items for students and for parents and for educators, and wherever you are on that scale is. We all have different roles. I'm a student, I'm a parent, and I'm also an educator in some way. So there's lots of interesting stuff that go on there.
Yeah, and again, anyone who's subscribed or posted to Higher Ed Revolution, and you want to make a presentation or you want to be part of this program, please just send us a message, because we want this to be a supplement to what's happening online. Yeah. So please just send us a message with all of that.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, and anybody, also if you would like to expand on whatever you posted, or if you wanted to be in an interview, also just send us a message. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Now, just a small section in terms of Oplerno news. Unless we have anything else we want to go over.
Yeah, I was actually Jesse mentioned something, and it also piqued something in my interest. Something that I read on Harvard Business Review, which is that universities need to teach sales. It's something that universities don't really want to engage in, which is something.
Well, of course not. I mean, they don't want to think of themselves as a business or a sustainable anything. Just an intellectual exercise. So of course, commerce. The big horrible notion of commerce at universities. They don't concentrate on how do you do sales. You're absolutely right. Jesse, what did you want to say about that?
Yeah, there's definitely a sensitivity towards, you can, in a way, I hesitate making this parallel, but you can parallel a little bit with scientists. They've sort of been entrepreneurialized, and that entrepreneurial spirit has been co-opted in some cases by corporations. I took a really interesting course in my program called The Politics of Expertise, and they talked a lot about where expertise comes from, who determines it being expertise, right? And then one of the topics of conversation was how scientists have been co-opted. Their expertise is sort of like has begun to be siloed in a way. But I feel like the power of teaching sales in a way that is not necessarily just to retain or grow profits is that at its core you believe in what you're doing, right? So you're still able to look at this concept of education and what you're offering or sharing and cultivating as being just a natural part of the process, and you have to sell that, right? I mean, that's it. It's very basic. It's not just that you're creating profit for an educational institution or for yourself. Primarily, you're creating a manner in which you are able to continually do that in a way that is meaningful for others.
Yeah, well, it goes also to the story whether schools or vocational or universities should focus on the vocational. But if we look at the statistics, almost 50% of students will work in sales in some way. Almost 170,000 MBA students a year. Only a fraction are learned anything about sales. I mean, besides from getting perhaps a small introductory course. There's nothing else that covers sales. Well, for at least I'd assume that if you're doing a master's in business, something sales should be in there.
Yeah, that is the problem right now with the configuration of the universities, in that they're highly theoretical and not really connected to the documentation and the learning of skills. And the sales piece, sales is usually pushed off on admissions departments. Okay, they're supposed to bring them in. And the professoriate kind of, poo-poos admissions departments, of course, until they're dependent upon them for the students. And that notion of sales and commerce sort of flies again in the face of the training that most people are receiving, which is, highly academic, highly theoretical, and also, to be blunt, the poo-pooing of commerce, okay, in the past 50 years, as I'll take a stab at this, as the professoriate has become more and more dominated by sort of, postmodern, post-structuralist, and Marxist analysis and thought, which are great tools, but they don't necessarily focus in on the idea of, here's a student, you're supposed to help them. You're supposed to, be their advocate. You also need to show them and see the idea that what they're learning is meaningful and going to be relevant to their future lives. And since a lot of professors are isolated in the higher ed bubble, okay, in the academic bubble, they haven't had to concern themselves with that. And because of that, those skills in those areas have atrophied. I saw this at a meeting I attended last week on the board of advisors for a large, small research university for a particular program, and the notion of, improving the numbers was coming from staff related to that section of the school, but the professors were all kind of like, shocked and, and poo-pooing a little bit that notion of expansion of the commerce. So
I would add to that. I mean, when the teachers, the professors that I had in my second program, those that were most in touch with reality in this sense were the adjuncts, right? They were
as always, the best group in academia is the adjuncts. They're just getting completely exploited. Anyway, sorry.
You're right. I mean, they had to have their toes in both spaces. They understood theoretical discussion, but they also understood practical discussion. And the teacher that I had for the class that led up to the Kosovo venture was exactly that. She was so challenging in terms of what I wanted to pursue and why, and all the way through the program. And she constantly was frustrated with her position within the university and how it was just completely overlooked and sidelined in a lot of respects. It was disrespectful, and this is one of the more progressive institutions in New York City right now.
An aside, something to dovetail off of that, I had another really interesting conversation with someone who just handles financial aid, because one of the things that I've been doing is taking a look at student loan debt and its relationship to financial aid and how financial aid gets calculated. Okay, the calculations are pretty straightforward, and to be perfectly honest, they're quite fair in terms of they look at, in the U.S., the income levels of the parents, any savings that the parents have done for the education, the income of the student, and savings, etc. there, and they come up with a figure of what's called a need, sort of a family contribution. Okay, and what's interesting is that contribution is done by a company associated with the College Board, and each school is supposed to sort of have that same figure per for each student. So what's interesting is there's a certain amount of price fixing, and a bunch of schools have gotten busted for price fixing in terms of their financial aid, in terms of colluding with how much financial aid they're going to give particular students. What this person was saying is that they actually have a matrix, a graph, where that they use to calculate student financial aid payments, and what they expect the debt of the student to end up with. But they aren't necessarily making those calculations of what the student is going to end up with in terms of debt public to that student. Their goal is to sign them up for as much sort of the debt as possible, to get them to pay for their school, to get them to come to the school. But then when they're there, they're not being transparent about the long-term ramifications of servicing that debt. And so the reason why I bring it up with you, Jesse, is that there are the tenured track faculty isolated from those economic decisions can kind of claim, or essentially tries to claim, the moral high ground of higher education isn't a business, how it's not a consumer-driven industry, that it's in some higher purpose. And certainly for some that's accurate, maybe, but they don't see that there are all these support systems underneath them, literally, okay, in terms of the hierarchy of power at the university, that really is about commerce and exploitation, and not being transparent with the costs. And so you get, the staff members who would like things to be more fair or more generous or more, actually a system where there was competition for keeping costs low, but they're kind of like shuttled off into the nether regions, and what really is, placed front and center is this notion of tuition, debt, and power that is maintained by the current tenured faculty and the administrations. And that was really the dissertation and now the book that I wrote. People have said to me that was, wow, that's fairly cynical what you wrote, and now I'm actually finding out that it's even more cynical once I start to. It was cynical on what was happening with adjuncts. Okay, now there's a whole crazy thing going on that we didn't really see, that literally is taking students without much debt, giving them these dreams, and saddling them with a huge amount of debt that allows them to be controlled afterwards. And that's kind of sick. And we'd love to hear from people who have their own stories about this, who are working in the industry. We'd really like to get those kinds of stories out, and they're important to get out, because reform's not going to happen unless we let some light into the to the current practices.
And to sort of parallel with that, even, you know, and to hold out some hope, right, that not all of this is necessarily cynical, is that there are spaces in which people are taking matters into their own hands, whether that's teachers, whether that's students, whether that's communities. So we want to hear those stories as well, right? If you have something to contribute, that's like, you know, if you read my post on Learning Everywhere and you're like, I was that 18-year-old and I decided to do this instead, right? Maybe you did take a couple of courses at an institution because you needed a specific skill set, but maybe you also went and interned with some organization that gave you some training and then you lumped it in with something else. We want to hear those stories as well. So
we're not only going to point out the problems, okay? We're going to point out the solutions. Enough just bitching about the system, okay?
Yeah, well, it's a revolution now. It's a revolution, so we have to go for the solution now.
Yep.
Awesome.
Yep. We're not just going to whine about it. Nope.
Back in the day.
Back when things were just and society was perfect. Yeah, no, we're gonna point out the flaws and we're gonna have a solution to it. And that's the way to have a good revolution.
And I guess from the standpoint of the student, I'm also not going to say I'm a young kid and I expect my education to just come to me. That's not it either. You got to be involved in that, you know.
Well, hopefully we can get some people in there. We can find some people in their late teens, early 20s who can come on board and tell us what they want, and take care of it. Because I think the last thing the world needs is the older generation. Generation X, you guys are, you know, the millennials or whatever, but Generation X is doing a great job with the boomers, doing a great job with the boomers to destroy the products of 2,000 years of progress. And we need younger people to start. You guys need to seize control. And so I'm as a Generation Xer, I want you guys to have as much more and more power, because Generation X has not done such a great job with that.
I would also say, to plug one more time, Debbie Donsky's piece on Rediscovering Wonder is great in terms of the fact that there's overlap. There's cross-generational needs there too, right? We can't just look at these at our generations as separate entirely, and that we can't work together to achieve common ground. So that's a subject for a whole nother discussion, to see whether, you know, that tactic would work, or whether hey, you know, it's every generation for themselves. So I know you're much more, you know, bring people together, which is exactly what. But sometimes, you know, you have to fish or cut bait, as they say. Right. So listen, let's. So we're going to go to the Dougald interview. Here it is. So we're back to the, in some ways, institutions enforcing, you know, grad grind back on us, to talk about, you know, Hard Times by Dickens. You know, the person who was just, you know, it's the test, it's the, you know, the quantification of knowledge, where so much about our lives can't be quantified, or we have to figure out different ways in which to measure that.
And to talk about a concrete example, which maybe fills in some of the picture that we've been talking about in terms of the kinds of projects and initiatives that do seem to be opening things up, and that also brings this stuff into focus. So Spacemakers, the agency that I founded in the UK, which is now run by a fantastic team led by Matt Weston, they have been working on this project called the Brighton School, which started in the city of Brighton, which is where Matt has lived. It's where his family and his kids are growing up. It's a place that he's really deeply involved with. And in the part of the city where he lives, there was a bit of funding for a public art project. And you know, this happens sometimes in the British system, that when there's a big developer comes in and does a project in an area, they have to put like a really tiny percentage of the amount that they're spending on that project into a fund to do something cultural in the area. And so there was an invitation for artists to propose projects, and Spacemakers went and said, look, we don't think that this neighborhood needs another sort of fancy piece of street furniture. which is what these things often turn out to be. They said, what we're going to do, we want you to give us the funding and we will create a public arts school. And one of the issues that Brighton has is it's got great universities that are really highly rated, but it has a really low level of the graduates staying on in the city where they've been studying when they finish their studies. So
and probably not a lot of great local access to that university, because we're seeing a lot of that in the States of the universities, even the public universities are kind of not really doing a great job of bringing the communities into the education and supporting people from the local towns who are generally poor or underrepresented communities into those. So yeah, that's great.
Yeah, I mean, certainly the kinds of agendas that end up steering the overall direction of these institutions doesn't necessarily make it easy to prioritize that stuff in practice. So what they did with Brighton School is they created a postgrad program, 5 students who had graduated the previous summer from a range of different disciplines, where they came in and for 2 days a week they were the Brighton School over 6 months, and they were paid for their time. So instead of paying to go to school, they were actually being paid a living wage. And they were, for the first 3 months, they had all kinds of guest teachers coming in, people who were really amazing, leading figures in different fields in relation to public space and what we do with it. And then over the second 3 months, they, as a team, created a project and commissioned and installed it so that they actually created a public artwork that was grounded in the place and coming out of what they were doing. So that was 2 days a week. The other 3 days a week, they were free to work on their own project. But not just that, they got the space in which they were working as the school, they got that as a studio space for the rest of the week. So they had a base where they could work together, develop their freelance work, begin to build their careers. So you've got a model there that took an amount of funding that would normally create one piece of public art, and created an opportunity which was an opportunity for 5 students, but also prototyping something that could be done on a larger scale. And the piece of public art gets made at the end of it as part of that as well. And sort of through the middle of that, you catch sight of the possibility of rethinking the way that we do these things. Now, what's really interesting to me is that I was chatting to Matt the other day, and he said he'd been having a meeting with somebody from the management in a university elsewhere talking about this project. And in the meeting, one of these senior managers turned around and said, well, we don't really get how you could get away with calling it a school when you weren't giving out a qualification.
Yeah, and that's so typical.
Yeah, the reduction of learning to the currency of qualifications, because that's what qualifications are. They're a bit like banknotes. They're a currency that you hope you're going to be able to.
They're ribbons. They're ribbons that we wear on Remembrance Day to show that we're part of the club. And more and more people all over the world, it's funny, there's sort of like 2 tracks. They really want that ribbon.
So that was a really interesting interview, Rob, and I'm really looking forward to seeing the rest of that interview. I think that's pretty much it for today. And
yep. Please remember, if you have any questions or comments, you can send them to us, and we look forward to seeing you next week. And Daniel, what do you want to say? Get the last word.
I think this is a great one. I think next week we'll have Syrian Johansson, of course, in there. I think in a couple of weeks we'll have Debbie Donsky on there. There's so many fun things to come. I mean, we could probably talk for another 2 hours, 3 hours, but we're going to save that all for next week. So thank you very much, and as always, we'll see you online.
Adios.
Then 2008 becomes this threshold where after that, there's like a critical mass of people in society for whom it's not working. And in particular, there's young people for whom the whole deal that they've been offered just doesn't seem to be there anymore.
The changing face of higher education in the 21st century. This is something I care very much about, so I'm glad to be here. My name is Scott Rank, and I am a newly minted PhD. I also run a website and host a podcast called The Scholarpreneur,